Let's go to the U.S. now, where the Trump administration is facing mounting pressure over its policy of separating immigrant children from their parents at the country's southern border with Mexico. Over 6 weeks up to the end of May, almost 2,000 children were taken from their parents. They were detained while their parents faced prosecution for entering the country illegally. The practice has drawn condemnation from the UN, and domestically, even evangelical leaders who backed Donald Trump for president are voicing their opposition. One preacher, Franklin Graham, called it disgraceful. The president has falsely blamed the Democrats for the separation policy. After initially wavering, he said he will now support a compromise bill being debated in the House next week. His ultimate demand, though, is that it will include full funding for another key immigration policy of his, a wall along the border with Mexico. Well, for more on this, I'm joined from San Francisco by Gregory Chen, an immigration lawyer and director of government relations at the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. Now, you have a lot of colleagues that you're speaking to who are at the border where some of these separations are taking place. Tell us a little bit about what they're telling you. Paint a picture for us of what is actually going on.
Well, thank you for having me on. And that's right. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has a program that is operating with attorneys going into detention facilities. And what we are hearing now is that the practice of separating these children from their families has escalated dramatically under the Trump administration. And this inhumane policy is resulting in children being literally torn from their parents' arms. If you look at the border checkpoint in McAllen, Texas, it is a massive warehouse where the children are now housed on a temporary basis that is referred in Spanish as the perrera, which means the dog kennel, because it's a massive warehouse where there are chain link fences structured into jail cells where children are sleeping on the hard concrete floor with nothing more than a mat to separate them from the floor. Children are moaning and crying at night and are unable to sleep. So the impact on these children is absolutely inhumane. We now know of many cases where these separations have happened. Parents have, at least a couple of cases, parents have done terrible things to themselves. One father from Honduras has committed suicide after having his 3-year-old son torn from his arms. This was just a couple of weeks ago. And as a father of 2 children myself, any parent, I think, would be horrified that this administration continues this practice here in the United States. It does deserve the condemnation both in the United States and abroad.
Well, it's certainly been getting a lot of condemnation. Just explain to us why this has started to happen now, because President Trump blames this on the Democrats, saying that they sort of put this system in place. But what's happened recently? Why have we seen the numbers of children being torn away from their parents escalate?
Well, it's important, first of all, to clarify that there is no such existing law that President Trump referred to where he has blamed others for his current policies. This policy of separating children from their families is completely a creation of this administration, and it has escalated to the numbers well over 2,000 that you described before. What we are seeing now is that because the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, announced a zero-tolerance practice of prosecuting anybody who enters the country illegally, that prosecution practice is resulting in the parents being separated from these children. And it is entirely something that the administration can decide not to do at this point. The asylum-seeking right is something that is guaranteed under U.S. law and international law. Even if an asylum seeker crosses the border illegally, they have the right in the U.S. to seek asylum, because oftentimes asylum seekers don't have the opportunity to get the right documentation before they flee from persecution, from violence, from murder. And they should not be prosecuted at all. They should have the opportunity to seek asylum, but because this administration has decided to prosecute them, we are seeing more and more parents separated from their children.
So automatically treated as criminals, basically. Next week, there is due to be, I think, a few votes on immigration measures planned in the House. And it does seem that the president will be using this issue, one of the many issues that is due to be debated, as leverage to get what he has been wanting since the beginning of his campaign, and that is a wall between the U.S. and Mexico.
Well, that's right. House Speaker Paul Ryan has announced that 2 immigration bills will be getting votes in the House next week. One of those bills is a completely anti-immigrant bill sponsored by the House Republican Chairman Bob Goodlatte. The other one is a so-called compromise bill that was negotiated by Republicans with the White House. What began as an effort to provide protection for dreamers, young people who were brought here as children, has been completely distorted and perverted into a bill that essentially enables this White House to implement the exclusionary practices at the border that are turning back asylum seekers, that are resulting in parents and children being separated and detained for long-term periods in terrible, terrible conditions. This bill not only has those kinds of provisions, but will cut the existing channels for legal immigration to the United States. Families will be less able to bring their loved ones in here to reunify under legal immigration system visas. And they will also cut something called the diversity visa lottery, which enables people from countries that traditionally have not been able to come to the United States, such as from Africa. It will make it much more difficult for them to come to this country. In addition, massive amounts of funding for the border wall on the order of $25 billion. So this bill has completely been perverted into a White House enforcement exclusion measure.
One last point. Please, it's obviously a hugely divisive issue. Immigration in the United States. President Trump himself is hugely divisive in the United States and beyond. But how much condemnation have you seen, especially from people who would usually support the president, to this issue, to the separating children from their parents?
Well, what is notable, as you mentioned, is that now we see more faith, Christian, evangelical leaders now coming out and saying that what this president is doing is inhumane, that it is also un-American and contrary to the long-standing values we have to make sure that families are protected, let alone the issue that many faith leaders are saying is necessary to completely turn around in this administration of protecting refugees and welcoming the stranger to our shores, a standard faith belief that many, many faiths espouse. This administration has now suffered that kind of criticism from widespread voices around the country, and it is consistent with standard polling that has been developed in the United States regarding the treatment of people coming to this country. And with respect to the dreamers, the dreamer population, well more than 80% of Americans believe that the dreamers and those who are undocumented should have the opportunity to legalize here in the United States. So the type of anti-immigrant measures this White House is now pushing to a floor vote in the House next week just does not have the support in the United States among Americans.
It'll be interesting to see what does come out of those votes next week. For the moment, Gregory Chen, immigration lawyer and director of government relations at the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Sir, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.